Are there any religious arguments worth doing? I honestly don't think so because they all fail for the exact same fallacious reason. They're all just massive arguments from ignorance. Not that they care or anything, they just really want to believe. But the real world is increasingly turning against them, and they've got nothing else to rely on. So this isn't going to be pretty, but it is necessary to rip it all apart. Because these people are really, really dumb. I don't know if I mentioned this the last time, but this is a very old video. 6 years old, in fact, and normally I don't bother to go back that far, but I saw it go by and said, hey, what the hell? So this is part 2 of Matt Fradd's Pascal's Wager video, and it continues to be every bit as embarrassing as the first part was. Not that someone like Matt cares, because he's just a liar for the Lord and couldn't care less about the truth. So let's wrap this up with a solid refutation of Pascal's wager. Not that the religious care or anything, because they're just desperate to believe.
Well, if God exists and I bet on him, that is to say, I believe in him.
But that's still not how beliefs work. You can't choose to believe anything. I mean, go ahead, give it a shot. Believe that you have $1 billion in your bank account. Now go to the bank and see if it's true. It doesn't translate, does it? That's not really the important bit, though, because you can't choose to believe it in the first place. You can lie to yourself and others. You can pretend. You cannot force yourself into believing something that you are not personally convinced is actually true. And even if you are convinced that it's true, that doesn't make it true. This is why the whole Pascal's wager bullshit fails, one place among many, because fundamentally, it's not something that you're even capable of doing in the first place. But let's go see if he doubles down on his own stupidity, because I suspect the answer is yes.
Then Pascal says you gain everything.
Seriously, do you think that your God is that fucking stupid? Because that's really what you're saying. You don't think your God, if it exists at all, couldn't see right through all of your stupid bullshit? What the hell is wrong with you? Because the only way you gain anything here is A, if you can force yourself to believe something, and you can't, and B, if the God that you are betting on actually exists and you've got no means whatsoever to prove it, and C, if your God is so absurdly stupid as to be fooled by your ridiculous wager, and any God that would do that, that's not a God worth paying attention to at all. Because here's something else that the wager purposely ignores. Which God? Because man has made up many thousands of gods to kiss the ass of, and we have no evidence that any of them, not a single one of them, are actually real. So which one do you pick? Well, for someone like Matt and Pascal, they can only pick the one they already follow, because this isn't a serious argument. This is just a way to convince the already deluded that they're justified in believing and will keep handing over their money. Nobody else falls for it because nobody else is that dumb. And it's really sad that Matt is, right?
Right? You gain virtue and happiness in this life and eternal happiness in the next.
Except you don't. If you believe, and let's just give them that for the moment, because if we don't, then the whole argument falls apart, but assuming that you can just choose to believe, that doesn't mean that you'll be happy. Tons of theists, not just Christians, but theists across the spectrum, they are positively miserable. They are terrified of their imaginary monster in the sky. They think they are miserable sinners who deserve nothing but eternal torment. They never find happiness because they're expecting God to just hand them a wife or a husband or whatever with no effort on their part, because that's the bullshit that's been drummed into their heads since day one. They go through life alone. They never make any decisions on their own because they're just waiting for God to show them what their purpose is. And then they just rationalize away why they're so unhappy all the time. This is incredibly common. You don't just get happiness in this life magically because you think you deserve it. That's not how this works. And you have no evidence that there's anything beyond death. The whole thing is complete bullshit, and believing it doesn't make it true. Seriously, what the hell is wrong with you? You need serious help.
If God exists and I don't believe in him, then I'm going to basically be living an illusion. I'm going to be living as if God doesn't exist.
Except you can't see that by believing. You are living in illusion, not in reality. Just because you really believe a thing, that doesn't make it true. Now, I'm sure this will come up somewhere in this video, it always does, but he'll claim that if he's wrong, he loses nothing, but that is absolutely not true. You lose the only life that you actually get, wasting your time on beliefs that aren't factually correct, following rules that mean absolutely nothing, giving your time and your money to a scam church for no reason other than, I believe it. In the end, you have given up any grasp on reality in the hopes that your ridiculous fantasy beliefs just might be true. You lose everything that matters. Your time, your money, your intellectual integrity, everything. Because people like Matt, they're not that bright. What else is new?
It's going to be very difficult for me to be able to believe in things like objective beauty and morality and things like this.
Because they're not real. As with most things that the religious do, they are so subsumed in their asinine beliefs that they stop caring about the actual truth. This is why I keep saying that they're living in a bizarre fantasy land in their own heads, because that's really all that's happening. They stop caring about what is and go with, it sounds good to me, which is positively stupid. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you believe, it matters only what's actually going on. And for people like Matt, they just don't give a damn. Sad, isn't it?
Pascal doesn't talk about hell, but I suppose we could extrapolate and say, well, if God exists and I don't believe him, then I run the risk of being damned for all eternity.
And this, like all other religious arguments, is predicated on what the individual believer believes because, well, I wanna. This is why you keep seeing these exact same arguments being made from a lot of different religions and denominations because they don't actually get you to any actual truth. Just to, it sounds good to me, and that's stupid, isn't it? So Christians can use this, so can Muslims, so can Hindus, so can most of them. Why? Because this argument doesn't actually mean anything. It doesn't actually get you anywhere. It's just there to get the existing believers to emotional comfort, not to actual fact. Because they don't care about the facts, do they? These people are real morons.
Okay, what if God doesn't exist? Well, if God doesn't exist and I bet on him, well, what do I lose?
Everything. I've already gone into this, but I think you lose everything that matters in life if you believe stupid shit for bad reasons. Intellectual integrity, self-respect, all of the things that you could have done but didn't because you were too busy chasing an irrational fantasy. I have run into a lot of theists who say, well, I always wanted to do X, but that's not what God had in mind for me. And how do you know what God had in mind for you? Oh, it wasn't God that told you anything. It was other people. And those people generally are self-serving. The clergy wants you to go into the clergy so that you can keep making more money for the church. Nobody has any concrete proof for what God actually wants because there's no reason to think that any gods exist in the first place. So you lose absolutely everything in pursuit of a complete delusion. What the hell is wrong with you?
Well, you might first say, well, you lose a lot of things. I mean, you don't get to have different sexual experiences that you might want to have.
Why is it that that's the first thing these idiots ever come up with? Because their religion represses their sexuality, of course. That's another thing that being religious does for you. I've been married to the same wonderful woman for more than 30 years, and I'm very happy. But the rate of divorce among the religious, that tends to be really, really high. People get forced into marriage at a young age because these people just desperately want to get laid. So the first person that they think that they can marry, whether they're compatible or not, just so that they can get their rocks off, hey, they'll go for it and regret it later when it turns out to be a miserable experience with someone that they have absolutely nothing in common with. Well, it was God's plan. What, for you to get divorced, sometimes multiple times? Sure, tell me another one. Among Catholics, of which Matt is one, the chances of Catholics getting divorced in a first marriage is 28%. For second marriages, that number jumps to 76%. For third marriages, it's up to 87%. For Protestants, 51% of marriages end in divorce. So much for it's God's plan. And a lot of Christian sects tell you not to get divorced, but rather to just deal with the unhappiness because you're just a miserable sinner anyhow and you deserve it. Whereas I don't know anyone in my group of family and friends that has ever gotten divorced. My parents didn't, my wife's parents didn't, my sister didn't, none of our friends have. I didn't, obviously, and the vast majority of them are atheists. So check your bizarre sexual repression, Matt. It just makes you look stupid.
You don't get to sleep in on Sunday mornings and things like that.
I do, and so too do the vast majority of theists because church attendance is at an all-time low. Nobody cares about your stupid church anymore. Just about everybody sleeps in. Weekly church attendance was sitting at 28% in 2024. That means that an estimated 15,000 churches are likely to close in the United States in 2025. It potentially impacts 1 in every 12 churches nationwide. More churches close than open by a significant margin. The Catholic Church dropped 11% of churches between 2000 and 2017, with their numbers dropping by more than 2 million people by 2019. This is not healthy. Anybody who thinks it is out of their minds.
But it's interesting to note that different Pew Research studies have shown that religious people who attend some sort of religious service once a week, tend to be happier. And we're even seeing people like Jordan Peterson, who doesn't appear to be a Christian, speaking of the benefits of belief in God.
Jordan Peterson is an idiot. And when you're only relying on self-reporting, of course the religious are going to say they're happier. But if you actually go and look at actual data, that is not how that works. Remember, we can go look at the happiness index and find out that the happiest nations are the ones most secular and the unhappiest are the ones most religious. In fact, happiness tends not to have anything to do with religious beliefs at all, but of economic success, stability, and safety, and having a community to rely on. That community is about the only thing that the religious really have, and it's baked into the scam. However, you don't need religion for that. In fact, it seems to help if you're not religious, doesn't it?
So you could say, well, even though I have to lose some of those things, in the end it ends up being a benefit anyway, because in believing in God, I'm becoming more virtuous, hopefully more charitable, more prudent, and that'll make for a more happy life.
Wrong. Now this comes up a lot, but for most theists, the only charitable giving they do is giving money to their churches. That's not charity, that's a scam. For most churches, the only actual charitable work they ever do is little more than a membership drive. They'll give you a sandwich if you agree to pray with them. That's not charity. Charity is expecting nothing at all in return. It is doing for others purely for the sake of doing for others. And that's not what churches do. Throwing a $20 bill in the collection plate doesn't count as charitable giving. Rent a clue.
But if God doesn't exist, and I don't believe in him, well, I'm never going to know that anyway, because at the end of this life, I will just fall into oblivion.
If no gods exist, because again, we can't just assume one god or no gods like Pascal's wager does, but if no gods exist, then that goes for everyone, doesn't it? Believers and non-believers alike. You die, that's it. The lights go out, and that's all she wrote. The question remains, though, are there any gods to begin with? And based on the evidence that we have, that doesn't seem to be the case, no matter how hard you believe. At the end of the day, belief is entirely irrelevant if it doesn't exist in demonstrable reality, and sadly for the religious, it certainly doesn't seem to, does it? This is why evidence matters, and ridiculous arguments like Pascal's wager don't. These will never convince anyone who isn't already religious, and Matt knows it, which is why he's only talking to people who are already on his side.
So Pascal says, so go ahead, believe in God. What are you waiting for?
All of the problems with the proposition to be cleared up, of course. I have no idea if Matt is going to bring up non-Christian gods or not, but that's what really kills this whole thing dead. I'm going to give him a little more time before I really dive into it because this is something that absolutely has to be addressed. It is what kills off just about all religious arguments, but none so badly as this one. So let's give him a little more time to hang himself, then we're going to start pulling on the rope.
If God exists and you bet on him, you get everything. If God does not exist and you bet on him, you lose nothing.
And there we go, except that's simply not true. Every part of this is just wrong, as we've already covered. So, except for the whole which God thing, I think I've covered this pretty well. So I'm just going to step back and only break in if he says something really stupid, which, knowing Matt, could be every 6 seconds, but we'll have to see.
So believe in God. Now, I know, as I said in the beginning of this film, that there are a lot of questions about this argument. So let me just address one of them. You might be thinking, this seems rather cheeky, doesn't it? I mean, you're only believing because of self-interest. Yeah, that's true, and Pascal was aware of that.
Absolutely everyone was aware of that. While Pascal was around, many argued that the wager was a cynical manipulation of faith, prioritizing potential rewards over genuine beliefs. None of these criticisms are new. It only remains prevalent in religious apologetics because they don't actually care about reality. They are just desperate to believe. And of course, they're not talking to us, are they? They're just pandering to the already faithful so that they continue to get paid. This is nothing to be proud of, but they don't really care, do they? This is why they don't depend on evidence, but on arguments because, hey, it sounds good to me, is about all their idiot followers are actually concerned with. And that's not a good thing. Let's not fool ourselves like the religious do. They have got serious problems upstairs.
But when you think about it, when the disciples preached the risen Christ, they were saying things like, come and receive eternal life. So it's not like Christianity is entirely devoid of this self-interestedness, right? We are saying to people, come and believe in God so that you will have eternal life, so that you will avoid damnation.
So that they can give you their money and you don't have to go out and get a real job. The clergy class is a leech on the ass end of society, after all. Nothing has really ever changed, has it? It's the same old scam that's been going around for thousands and thousands of years. If you can convince dumb people that they should pay you for their emotionally comforting lies, hey, you're golden, right? Because that's how this works, and it's positively pathetic.
Secondly, Pascal obviously doesn't want people who believe in God to have a superficial faith where they believe in him only because they're going to get something out of it. He wants them to go on from there to something greater and deeper and more serious.
But neither Pascal nor any con man since has any reason for that to happen. If you want to have a deeper belief, then you need to move on from cheap apologetics and stupid arguments to actual evidence. And you still don't have any, do you? Convincing people for emotional reasons, which is all he's doing here, that is utterly pathetic. This is just lying for the Lord, and this is why people are flooding away from religion. In the US, approximately 52% of adults who were raised Catholic have left the faith. Of those, 40% have never returned. According to Pew, that means that 12.8% of all US adults are former Catholics. Only 1.5% have become Catholics after having been raised as something else. Catholicism is just a mess. I can see why someone like Matt is so desperate to get anyone to believe. As of 2023, there are more than 24 Catholic dioceses in the US that are either bankrupt or going through the proceedings, and that number has likely risen since then. Most of them are sexual abuse cases, of course, but as we've seen, nobody wants to sit in the pews anymore, and that's driving them out of business. The religious are desperate, and that's a very good thing.
But I think we can agree, or should agree as Christians, that God stoops to conquer. So there you are. That's the basic understanding of Pascal's wager. I'd love it if you'd like to leave me your comments below. Tell me what you think of the wager.
And they did. Lots of it is negative, but we expect that, right? One thing that I've noticed, and remember, this is an old video on a channel that I don't know that Matt Fradd had anything at all to do with, but the channel creator themselves are not responding to anyone. I scrolled through and not one single response in 6 years was anywhere to be found. Somehow I'm not surprised by that, and you probably aren't either, because that's how most religious channels tend to operate. Either they ignore all comments while telling people to comment because it helps with the algorithm, or they only respond to the people on their side and they entirely ignore their detractors. Because of course they do. Matt even said it himself. He's making this video for Christians, not for anyone that he thinks should believe, but for the people who already do. There were even a couple of comments that said that Pascal's wager was only useful for reassuring believers and useless for convincing atheists, which is entirely true, but that's not how you come to a rational understanding of reality, is it? But the religious don't care about any of that at all, do they? They are positively terrified of reality. And that's kind of sad, isn't it?
If you have arguments against the wager, I'd love to read them too. And in a separate video, I'll respond to your comments. In the meantime, please follow me at Matt Fradd on Twitter and click that subscribe button down there. Thanks for listening.
No clue if he ever did, and frankly, I don't think it's worth my time going to look. But as I said earlier, he didn't respond to the biggest criticism of Pascal's wager at all, because it all falls apart if he does. What if the option isn't my God or no God, but look at all the potential gods out there? Because they can't handle that. Pascal's wager implodes under the weight of its own irrationality in that case. If there are multiple competing God concepts out there, then according to the wager, you should believe in all of them at the same time, even if they're all contradictory, just in case any of them are true, right? Well, no, that's not what Pascal wanted, and that's certainly not what Matt wants. He wants people to give his church money as it's spiraling the drain. Sorry, you have no justification for that, and the justification matters. So what happens if there is a God, but it's just not his God, and the God that's actually there, he's going to torture anyone who worships the opposition, but he's going to ignore anyone who didn't because there was insufficient evidence for any of them to believe. In that case, the only rational position to take is atheism. But we can invent a million different possibilities, but without the evidence to recommend any of them, what's the point? What if Cthulhu is real? Then nothing matters because the old gods are going to kill you regardless. This is really why playing these stupid what-if games are completely pointless. It only matters what is, and they have no evidence to support anything. They're not looking for what is. They're looking for whatever gives them the most money and control over society. And today, that's disintegrating. And that's a very good thing. So what do you think? Let me know down in the comments, not because I really care about engagement, but it's kind of hard to have a conversation otherwise. How can these people be this dumb? Because they've been brainwashed into believing it and are told, don't you dare ask any questions, because that'll just lead you out the door and into reality. And they can't have that, can they? Because otherwise, they're out on the streets looking for a job. These people are really idiots. They really are.